The night was silent. Not peaceful. Silent, the way a forest goes quiet when something dangerous is near. A young warrior crouched in the shadows beyond the tree line, eyes fixed on the fortress below. Stone walls, iron gates, torches burning gold against the dark. He had memorized every entrance, every guard rotation, every weakness in those walls. He had 20 years to plan this. His fingers tightened around the pendant at his throat. A small carved wolf, cracked down the center. The only thing they didn't burn. The only proof his family had ever existed. The Alpha King slaughtered your family. He had heard those words before he could even hold a sword. They were the first thing he remembered. The last thing he thought about before sleep. They were the reason he breathed. But here is what no one tells you about revenge. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a second to subscribe. It helps the channel grow and ensures you never miss the next chapter of these unforgettable Alpha King and Luna tales. The man who destroyed your family, raised you as his own son, fed you, trained you, called you his, and you never knew why. That question had haunted him longer than the grief ever did. Why keep the child alive? What kind of monster burns a family to ash, then pulls the surviving boy from the rubble and calls him son? He still didn't have the answer, but tonight he would find it. His jaw tightened. His voice dropped to barely a whisper, a vow made to no one and everyone at once. I came back to destroy him. The torches below flickered, and somewhere inside those walls, completely unaware of the storm crouching in the dark, a girl laughed. The memory came the way it always did, without warning. A estate burning against a black sky, screams swallowed by the sound of breaking wood. A little boy pressed behind a stone wall, too small to fight, too terrified to run. His father had been the most respected wolf in the region, loyal, honorable, never once questioned. Until the night the Alpha King's soldiers appeared at their gates with a single word: traitors. No trial, no evidence, just fire. His mother found him in the dark. She didn't cry, she pulled the pendant from her own throat and pressed it into his trembling hands. Her voice was steady, almost too steady for a woman watching her home burn. One day, you'll learn the truth. Then they took her. He never forgot her face in that moment. Not afraid, just certain. Like she knew something even death couldn't erase. He survived. He never understood why the Alpha King let him. Until the man looked him in the eye, lifted him from the ash, and called him son. 20 years later, he didn't use the main gate. He scaled the eastern wall, where the torchlight didn't reach, dropped silently into the inner courtyard, and moved through shadow like he was born in it. Because in many ways, he was. The Alpha King had trained him personally, taught him every combat technique, every tactical approach. The old man had no idea he'd been training his own executioner. He slipped through a side corridor, counting doors. The king's war chamber was 3 levels up. He just needed to reach it undetected and a door swung open directly in front of him. He pressed flat against the wall. Too late. A young woman stepped into the corridor holding a candle, a book tucked under her arm, clearly in the middle of a private thought, and then she saw him. They stared at each other. He had never seen her before, but something about her eyes stopped him completely. Sharp, unafraid, and unmistakably familiar in a way he couldn't place. Her voice was calm, almost amused. "You're not supposed to be in this wing." He said nothing. She tilted her head, studying him, the way a wolf studies something it hasn't decided about yet. "And you're definitely not a guard." His hand moved toward the blade at his side. Hers moved faster, and a dagger appeared from nowhere, leveled directly at his throat. She smiled. "Small, dangerous. I'd think carefully about whatever you're about to do." He went still, because she was right, and because he had just realized, from the royal insignia on the candle holder, from the confidence in her stance, from those eyes that reminded him of someone, this was the Alpha King's daughter. The one variable he had never planned for. He grew up inside the fortress the way a wolf grows up in a cage. Fed, protected, never free. The Alpha King gave him everything: tutors, weapons, a room with a real bed. By the standards of the court, he was treated better than nobles who had served for decades. No one said it out loud, but everyone noticed. The orphan boy with no name, given a seat at the king's table. They called him Cade, a name the Alpha chose himself, a name that meant nothing to anyone, except that it erased the one he'd been born with. He learned fast, fought faster. By 15, he could disarm soldiers twice his size. By 17, the Alpha watched his training sessions personally. Arms folded, expression unreadable. "You fight like you have something to prove," the king told him once. "Don't I?" Cade had said. The Alpha said nothing, just turned and walked away. That silence bothered Cade more than any answer would have. The other wolves were less careful with their words. Orphan. They said it was like a wound they were trying to reopen. Whispered it when he passed. Let it hang in the air during meals like smoke that wouldn't clear. He heard the rumors too. Fragments, never complete. That his father had conspired against the crown. That his family had sold secrets to enemy packs. That the execution had been deserved. He tried to find out more. Every time, a door closes. He once asked a senior servant who had worked in the fortress for 30 years, a woman old enough to remember his family. She went pale the moment he said his father's name. Set down the tray she was carrying. Looked at him with something between sorrow and terror. "I don't remember anything about that," she said. And walked away so fast she left the tray behind. The elders changed the subject. Soldiers suddenly had somewhere urgent to be. Even the fortress records from that year had pages missing. Cleanly removed, not torn. Someone had been careful. Whatever the truth was, it had been buried deliberately. And someone powerful was still keeping it there. He was 16 when he met her properly. The Alpha's daughter, Sarah. He expected someone untouchable, cold, a girl shaped entirely by privilege. She showed up to training at dawn one morning, without permission, and asked the weapons master to teach her the same drills Cade was running. The weapons master looked uncomfortable. "My lady, your father isn't awake yet," she said simply. She trained until her hands blistered. Didn't complain once. Cade watched her from across the yard, surprised despite himself. She caught him watching and raised an eyebrow. "Say something useful or stop staring," she said. "Your left side drops when you strike," he said. She looked at him for a moment, then adjusted her stance. "Show me." It started there. Not romance. Not yet. Something quieter. She was the only person in the fortress who spoke to him like he wasn't a charity case or a curiosity. She asked questions, real ones, about what he thought and what he remembered and what he wanted. She listened to the answers. He told her almost everything. Almost. They trained together in the early mornings before the court woke. She was sharp and stubborn and twice as perceptive as anyone gave her credit for. He started to understand why. She saw things her father's advisors missed, heard things between words, noticed the moments people chose not to speak. She would have made a better ruler than half the men advising the throne. He never told her that either. But once, after a long session, she sat beside him on the courtyard steps and said quietly, "My father watches you differently than he watches everyone else." Cade didn't respond. "Not like a son," she said. "Like someone he owes something to." The words landed somewhere deep. He turned to look at her. She was already looking at him. That calm, unreadable expression she used when she'd already figured something out and was waiting to see if you'd catch up. He almost asked her what she meant. Instead, he stood up, collected his weapons, and walked away. Because if she was right, he wasn't ready for what that answer might cost him. It was an accident. That was the part that haunted him most. He wasn't even looking. He had been sent to retrieve old military records from the lower archive. Routine. The kind of task given to young warriors to remind them that rank meant paperwork as much as combat. He had done it a dozen times. But that night a torch bracket was loose. It swung wide when he brushed past it, and the flame caught the edge of a tapestry, and in the scramble to smother it before it spread, he knocked a section of shelving sideways. Behind it was a door, small, iron-framed, sealed with a lock that was far too sophisticated for a storage room that wasn't supposed to exist. He stood in the smoke-thinned darkness, staring at it. He should have reported it, should have walked away. He picked the lock in under a minute. The Alpha had taught him that too. Inside were documents, dozens of them, rolled and sealed, organized by year, labeled in a precise administrative hand. He almost didn't look, almost told himself it was border records, supply logs, nothing. Then he saw his family name, his real name, the one he hadn't heard spoken aloud in 20 years. His hands were steady as he unrolled the first document. He had trained himself out of trembling. He read slowly, carefully, the way the Alpha had taught him to read. Absorb everything, react to nothing, understand before you feel. The official account was thorough. His father had been coordinating with rival pacts, secret meetings, coded correspondence, a planned uprising designed to fracture the kingdom during the Winter Summit, when the Alpha would be most exposed. The documents had dates, locations, names of co-conspirators. It was organized, detailed, and completely damning. At the bottom of each page, the Alpha King's personal seal, and his signature authorizing the execution. Cade set the document down, picked up another, read it, set it down. He worked through the entire collection in silence. An hour, maybe two. He didn't notice the torch burning low. He didn't notice his own breathing change. When he finally stopped, he sat on the cold stone floor, with his back against the hidden door, and stared at nothing. Everything he had feared was true. His father had been a traitor. His family had died for a real crime. And the Alpha King, the man who had fed him, trained him, named him, placed a hand on his shoulder the day he completed his warrior trials and said, "I am proud of you," had signed the order himself, had looked him in the eye for 20 years, knowing exactly what he had taken from him, had kept him close, had kept him grateful. Something cold moved through Cade's chest, colder than grief, colder than rage. It felt like clarity. He was gone before dawn. No letter, no explanation. He took only what he arrived with: the clothes on his back, the pendant at his throat, and the weight of everything he now knew. He didn't let himself think about Sarah. He couldn't afford to. The years that followed were not gentle. He found men who had reasons of their own to distrust the Alpha King. Wolves who had lost land, rank, family, quietly, efficiently, in ways that were never formally recorded. He trained with fighters in the Northern Territories, who didn't ask where he came from. He studied strategy, politics, every weakness in fortress architecture he could find. He became someone different in those years. Not harder exactly, sharper, the way a blade becomes something else entirely after enough time on the stone. He built alliances slowly, carefully, with people who understood that patience was its own kind of weapon. And on the night he finally decided he was ready, he stood at the edge of a fire with a small group of wolves who had pledged to follow him and spoke the only words that mattered. His voice didn't shake. It hadn't shaken in years. "The man who raised me will pay." The fire cracked and spat. No one in that circle doubted him. But what Cade didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that somewhere in that fortress, the woman he hadn't let himself think about had spent years asking the same questions he had. And she was dangerously close to finding different answers. They called him the Ghost Wolf. He never chose the name. It spread the way rumors spread among packs. Quietly, then everywhere at once. A warrior who appeared without warning, fought without mercy, and disappeared before anyone could confirm he had been there at all. He didn't correct them. A reputation was a weapon. He had learned that from the Alpha too. 3 years of building, 4 of waiting. He had allies in 6 territories now, pack leaders who owed him favors, warriors who had followed him through campaigns that never made it into official records. He had resources, intelligence networks, and a plan refined so many times it had become instinct. On paper, he was ready. Something kept stopping him. He told himself it was a strategy. Timing. He needed one more contact, one more piece of information, one more confirmation before he moved. But the truth was quieter and more troubling than that. The more he investigated the Alpha King, really investigated, the way he had learned to in those years away, the less the story held its shape. It started with a merchant in the Eastern Territory, an old man who had supplied goods to the region during the year of the massacre. Cade had approached him expecting confirmation, another account of his father's guilt, another piece of evidence to harden his resolve. Instead, the merchant frowned and said something that didn't fit. "Your father met with the Alpha the week before it happened. Privately. No guards, no advisors. Just the 2 of them." Cade had gone still. "That's not in any record." "No," the merchant said. "It isn't." He found a second witness 3 months later. A retired soldier who had been stationed at the estate the night of the attack. The man had drunk enough to be honest and sober enough to remember. He described the assault in detail and then mentioned, almost as an afterthought, a figure he had seen at the edge of the tree line, watching, not fighting, just watching. "One of the king's men?" Cade asked. The soldier shook his head slowly. "Wrong colors, wrong build. I reported it the next morning." He paused. Never heard anything back. A third witness. A fourth. Each one adding a fragment that didn't belong to the story Cade had read in those documents. A second seal on a correspondence that should have had only one. A name mentioned in connection with the massacre that appeared nowhere in the official record, and then appeared again, in a completely different context, years later. The same name, twice, in places it had no reason to be. Cade sat with that information for a long time. But the picture was becoming more complicated than Cade had wanted it to be. Because being complicated meant he might be wrong about something. And wrong meant the revenge he had built his entire adult life around might be aimed, not incorrectly, but incompletely. Someone else had been there that night. Someone who had stayed out of the torchlight and let the Alpha's soldiers do the work and walked away clean. Cade didn't know who yet, but the pendant at his throat seemed heavier suddenly. His mother's voice moved through his memory unbidden. "One day, you'll learn the truth." Not truths, not answers. The truth, singular, like there was one thing at the center of all of it that he still hadn't reached. He returned to the kingdom on a moonless night. No announcement, no army at his back, not yet. He came alone, the way he had left, scaled the same eastern wall, moved through the same shadows. He told himself he was gathering intelligence, confirming positions, finalizing the plan. He almost believed it. Then he slipped through a side corridor, turned a corner he remembered without thinking, and stopped. She was standing at the end of the hall. Older, stronger in her bearing, the kind of woman the girl he remembered had always been becoming. She held a candle in one hand and a document in the other, and she was reading with such focus she hadn't heard him yet. Then she looked up, and the expression that crossed her face was not surprising. It was something closer to relief, like she had been expecting him, like she had been waiting. "I wondered when you'd come back," Sarah said quietly. He said nothing. "I've been looking into your family." The words hit him like cold water. "And Cade," her voice dropped, careful and urgent at once. "You need to hear what I found before you do something that can't be undone." The pendant burned against his chest. He didn't move, but for the first time in years, he listened. He should have walked away. Every instinct built over 7 years of discipline told him the same thing. Neutralize the variable, change the plan, come back when the corridor was clear. Sarah was a complication he hadn't accounted for. and complications got people killed. He stayed anyway. She didn't reach for a weapon this time. She just watched him the way she always had. Like she was reading something written between his words, in the spaces where other people only heard silence. It had unnerved him when they were young. It unnerved him more now because he had spent 7 years learning to be unreadable, and she still looked at him like the pages were open. "You look terrible," she said. "You look—" He stopped himself. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. She turned and walked. A gesture. Follow. So casual it assumed he would. Like no time had passed. Like he hadn't vanished without a word, and built an arsenal pointed directly at her family. He followed. She took him to a small room off the East Library. Private. No servants. A fire was already burning low, like she had been working there for hours, which she clearly had. The table was covered in documents, cross-referenced notes, a map with locations marked in her precise handwriting. He didn't look at it yet. He looked at her. "Why didn't you send a word?" she asked. Her back was to him, pouring water from a flask on the shelf. Her voice was even, controlled. The way someone sounds when they've rehearsed does not sound hurtful. 7 years, not once. It wasn't safe. For who? He didn't answer. She turned and handed him the cup and looked at him directly. "You're lying," she said. "You left because you found something, and whatever it was, you didn't trust me enough to tell me." The fire cracked between them. "I trusted you more than anyone in this fortress," he said quietly. "That's exactly why I left without telling you." Something moved behind her eyes. She looked away first. They talked for 2 hours. Carefully at first, surface things, the kind of conversation that circles what it actually means. She told him about changes in the court. Alliances shifted. Her father was aging in ways that worried her. He listened and gave her nothing real in return, and hated himself for it. But somewhere in the second hour, the carefulness started to slip. She mentioned a training technique he had taught her. He remembered the morning without meaning to. Early light, cold stone steps, the way she had adjusted her stance without being told twice, and looked at him afterward like obviously. He almost smiled. "You still drop your left side," he said. "I fixed that years ago." "You did," he admitted. She looked at him then. Really looked. And for a moment they were not a warrior built on revenge, and a king's daughter sitting across a fire. They were just 2 people who had once been the only honest thing in each other's lives. "I missed you," she said. Simple. No performance in it. The words landed somewhere he hadn't protected well enough. "Sarah, I'm not asking you to say it back," she said quickly. "I'm just stating a fact. You were my closest friend, and you disappeared, and I missed you. That's allowed." He looked at the fire. "Yes," he said finally, "it's allowed." He should have left after that. Instead he stayed, and she refilled his cup, and the fire burned lower. And at some point the conversation shifted into something quieter and more dangerous than anything they had said out loud. The way she leaned across the table to point at something in a document, close enough that he could have reached out. The way she laughed once, unexpectedly, at something he said, and then caught herself, like she'd forgotten to be careful. The way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. He was always watching. He was watching, and simultaneously constructing reasons why everything he was feeling was a liability, a distraction, a weakness that the version of himself he had built over 7 years could not afford. Her father had signed the execution order. Her father. He let that settle over the warmth like cold water. Then she turned the document toward him. "I need to show you something," she said. Her voice had changed. The warmth pulled back, replaced by something focused and urgent. "I've been doing this for 2 years. Quietly. My father doesn't know." Cade looked at the papers properly for the first time. His chest tightened. Witness accounts. Cross-reference dates. Correspondence records with annotations in her handwriting. A map with a location circled. Not the estate where his family died. Somewhere else. Somewhere he recognized from his own investigation. "I found the same name twice," she said. In places it shouldn't appear. He went very still. "So did I," he said. She looked up sharply. "You've been investigating?" "Yes." "For how long?" 7 years. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. She sat back slowly, reading his face with that precision he had never been able to block. He watched the moment she understood. Not everything, but enough. Why did he left? What he had been building? Where the investigation had always been pointed? Her voice came out carefully, quiet, like she was handling something that might break them both. "Cade, what are you planning to do?" He said nothing, and his silence told her everything. Her face did not crumble. She was her father's daughter in that way. She absorbed the blow and held her composure, and only her eyes gave anything away. "Don't," she said. "One word. Everything in it." He looked at her, this woman who had waited, who had investigated alone for 2 years, who had missed him and admitted it without flinching, and felt the revenge he had built like architecture begin to develop its first crack. Not collapse, just crack. "There's something else at the center of this," she said. "Something neither of us has reached yet. And if you move before we find it—" She stopped, steadied herself. "You could destroy the wrong person." The pendant lay cold against his chest. His mother's voice. "One day you'll learn the truth." He looked at Sarah across the dying fire. "Then tell me what you found," he said. They worked through the night. No sleep, no pretense of stopping. Sarah spread her 2 years of documentation across the table, and Cade laid his 7 years beside it. And, for the first time, 2 investigations that had been running parallel in the dark finally met each other in the light. The picture that emerged was worse than either of them had built alone. It started with the seal. Cade had noticed it in the hidden archive, a second impression on a key document, slightly offset from the Alpha's official mark. He had assumed it was a copying error. Sarah had found the same anomaly on 3 separate pieces of correspondence and had done something he hadn't. She had traced it. She pulled a document from the bottom of her stack and placed it in front of him. "That seal belongs to Counselor Varon," she said, "my father's most senior advisor, the man who has sat on his right hand for 30 years. Cade looked at the impression, then at Sarah. "Varon drafted the execution order," she continued. "Not my father, the document my father signed, Cade. I compared the language. It doesn't match any record he personally authored. The phrasing, the structure, it was written by someone else and placed in front of him as a formality. He still signed it. He signed what he was told was a confirmed treason verdict, with full council agreement." She pulled another document forward. "Except 2 council members never agreed. I found their private correspondence. They raised objections the night before the execution. Those objections were never recorded." "No," she said, "they weren't." The missing witnesses were next. 3 people who had been present at the estate the night of the massacre had given statements in the immediate aftermath. Statements that, according to the official record, supported the treason charge completely. Sarah had located all 3. One had died 6 months after the massacre, under circumstances that were recorded as illness. One had relocated to a distant territory and, when Sarah's discreet inquiry reached him, had refused to respond. But his hands had been shaking when he read the letter. His wife had written back privately, 2 weeks later, with 3 words. "He is afraid." The 3rd witness had disappeared entirely. No death record, no relocation. Just gone. A clean removal from every document he had ever appeared in. The way you erase something you no longer want found. Cade stared at that entry for a long time. Someone was managing this, he said. Not reacting. Managing. Anticipating what would need to be cleaned. And cleaning it before anyone looked. For decades, Sarah said. This didn't stop the night of the massacre. It's been maintained. Which means whoever did this still has access. Still has power, she corrected. Real power. The kind that can make witnesses disappear, and records vanish, and keep a buried conspiracy buried for 30 years, without a single thread coming loose. She paused. Until now. The name appeared for the third time, just before dawn. They found it in a piece of correspondence so old, the edges had gone soft. A letter between Varen and an unnamed contact, discussing the necessary removal of a wolf family whose patriarch had gotten too close to something he shouldn't have found. The language was careful, bureaucratic. The kind of language designed to sound like administration and mean something entirely different. Her father's name appeared once in the letter. Not as an author, not as a conspirator, as a problem to be managed. Cade read it twice, then set it down very carefully. He was deceived, he said. The words felt strange in his mouth, foreign, like a language he had forgotten he once knew. My father trusted Varen completely, Sarah said quietly. He still does. Varen has been his closest advisor since before I was born. He has had 30 years to shape everything my father sees and hears and believes. Your father signed the order, based on evidence Varen constructed, witness statements Varen controlled, a council vote Varen manipulated. She looked at him steadily. He didn't order the massacre, Cade. He was handed a verdict and told it was justice. The fire had burned completely out. The room was gray with early light. Cade sat very still with everything he had built for 7 years quietly coming apart around him. Not loudly, not dramatically, just dissolving, the way ice dissolves when the season finally changes, slow and inevitable, and leaving nothing behind but cold water. His father hadn't been a traitor. The Alpha hadn't been the architect. The monster he had sharpened himself against for the better part of a decade was not the monster. Then who is he? The question moved through him like a wound. He had structured his entire existence around a single answer. Every choice, every sacrifice, every morning he woke up and chose discipline over grief. All of it pointed at one target, one purpose, one man. Without that, he didn't know what was left. Sarah was watching him. She had been watching him for several minutes, he realized, letting him sit with it, not filling the silence with false comfort or careful words, just present, the way she had always been. Say it, he said. Say what? Whatever you're not saying. She was quiet for a moment. I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. He looked at her. When you came back, she stopped, restarted. When you scaled the eastern wall and moved through the corridor and ended up in front of me, what was the plan? He said nothing. Cade, you already know, he said quietly. I want to hear you say it. The gray morning light sat between them. I came back to kill your father. The words left his mouth and landed in the room and could not be taken back. Sarah's face did not change. She had already known. He had seen her understand it last night. But knowing and hearing were different things. He watched her absorb the full weight of it this time, really absorb it, and he watched something shift behind her eyes. Not rage, something quieter and more devastating than rage. I need you to leave, she said. Sarah, I need you to leave this room right now. Her voice was perfectly level, controlled in the way that meant the opposite of calm. He recognized it because he had spent years building the same control in himself for the same reason, to keep something enormous from becoming visible. He stood. He wanted to say something. He had spent 7 years being precise with language, choosing words like weapons, and he stood in that gray morning light with nothing. No argument, no defense, no version of "I'm sorry" that was large enough for the shape of what he had almost done. He walked to the door. The investigation, he said without turning. Varen, what you found. It needs to go somewhere. Someone has to know. Silence. I know, she said finally, barely audible. He left, and stood on the other side of the door in an empty corridor, and the pendant lay against his chest, and somewhere in the fortress the man he had come to kill was sleeping peacefully, innocent in ways that changed everything. and guilty in ways that still hadn't been answered. He didn't run. He had every reason to. The evidence was in Sarah's hands. The conspiracy was bigger than one man could dismantle alone, and the smartest move was to disappear back into the shadows and wait. He had been waiting 7 years. He was done waiting. He found Varen in the council chamber just before the morning session. Early, deliberate. The old advisor stood at the window overlooking the courtyard, hands clasped behind his back, watching the fortress wake up with the calm of a man who had never once feared consequences. Cade closed the door behind him. Varen turned, looked at him with recognition. The orphan boy returned and manufactured a smile so practiced it almost looked real. "Cade, we heard you had come back. The Alpha King will be pleased." "Stop." Varen stopped. Cade crossed the room slowly. No weapon drawn. He didn't need one yet. "I found the seal," he said. "The correspondence. The witnesses you removed. The council votes you to be buried." Something moved behind Varen's eyes. Fast, calculated, gone before most people would have caught it. Cade caught it. "I don't know what you think you've found." "My father discovered something," Cade said. "That's what the letter said. He got too close to something." "What was it?" Varen's expression shifted. The performance fell away in layers. The warm advisor, the loyal servant, until what remained underneath was something older and colder and entirely unashamed. "Your father," Varen said quietly, "was going to expose a network that took 30 years to build. Trade agreements, pack alliances, revenue streams that funded half this kingdom's military capacity. He found one thread, and he was going to pull it. So you killed my family. I protected everything that mattered." "You destroyed everything that mattered," Cade said, "and you used the Alpha King to do it." "The Alpha King signed what was put in front of him," Varen said, almost bored. "As he always has, as he always will. That is what kings do, boy. The men behind them do the real work." The door opened. Both of them turned. Sarah stood in the doorway. Behind her, the Alpha King. And behind him, filling the corridor, council members, senior warriors, servants who had been summoned without being told why. She had moved fast, faster than Cade had expected. Her eyes met across the room, steady, unreadable, and then she stepped aside. She had brought an audience. She had brought everything. The evidence was presented there. Not in a closed session, not through quiet channels, openly, in front of every person standing in that fortress. Sarah spoke first, laying out 2 years of documentation with a precision that left no room for dismissal. Cade added his own. 7 years of witness accounts, cross-referenced records, the name that appeared where it shouldn't have, twice and then 3 times, and then everywhere once you knew to look. Varen tried to speak twice. No one listened. The room went very quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when a truth lands that cannot be walked back. Not shocked silence, the silence of people rearranging everything they thought they understood. The Alpha King did not speak for a long time. He stood at the center of it and absorbed every document, every account, every piece of a conspiracy that had lived inside his own council chamber for 30 years. And his face did something Cade had never seen it do. It broke. Not dramatically, just the authority left it. The composure. The careful control of a man who had ruled long enough to make it look effortless. What remained was something much older and much more human. When he finally spoke, he did not speak to the room. He spoke to Cade. "I failed your father," he said. His voice was rough, unmanaged. "He came to me. Before any of it, he came to me privately and told me he had found something in the trade records that troubled him. I told him to bring it to the council." A pause. "I sent him directly to Varen." The words fell into silence. By the time I understood what had happened, what had really happened, it was too late to undo. The order had been carried out. Your family is gone. His jaw tightened. "And there was a boy in the rubble." Cade said nothing. "I couldn't bring them back," the Alpha said. "I couldn't undo what my failure had allowed. But I could. He stopped, steadied himself. I thought if I raised you, if I kept you close, if I gave you every advantage, every skill, every resource, you thought you could pay a debt that can't be paid, Cade said quietly. Yes. And you never told me. No. The Alpha's voice dropped. Because every time I looked at you, I saw what my trust in the wrong man had cost. And I was a coward about it. I kept waiting for the right moment, and the right moment never came, and the years passed and... He stopped. I looked at Cade directly. I am sorry, he said. Not as a king, as the man who failed to protect your family, and then spent 20 years failing to tell you the truth. I am sorry. The pendant lay cold against Cade's chest. His mother's voice moved through him one more time. One day you'll learn the truth. He understood now what she had been certain of. Standing in the fire, watching everything burn, handing her son the one thing that would survive. She hadn't known the details, but she had known there was a truth beneath the surface one. She had known it was worth waiting for. She had trusted him to find it. Varen moved. He had been calculating the whole time, measuring the room, the exits, the moment everyone's attention was elsewhere. He was old, but he was not slow, and he had survived 30 years by knowing exactly when to disappear. He almost made it to the door. Cade was faster. He crossed the room in 4 strides and had Varen's arm locked before the man reached the threshold. No rage in it, no ceremony. Just precision, the kind the Alpha King had spent years teaching him, turned now to its proper purpose. You built your life on other people's destruction, Cade said quietly, close enough that only Varen heard. And you never once thought it would find you. Varen said nothing. My mother knew, Cade said. She didn't know your name, but she knew the truth was still alive. She trusted me. He released Varen to the guards who had moved in on either side, and stepped back, and breathed. The room began to move around him. Voices, orders, the procedural machinery of justice beginning to turn. He stood in the center of it and felt something he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Not peace exactly. Space. Where the rage had lived for 7 years. Just space. Open and quiet and strange. He looked across the chamber. Sarah stood against the far wall, watching him. She had been watching him the whole time, he realized. Through all of it. She didn't smile, didn't move toward him. But she didn't look away either. The kingdom didn't heal overnight. That was the truth no one said aloud in the days that followed. That justice and healing were different things. And justice had a ceremony, while healing had none. Varen's network was dismantled piece by piece, names surfacing from records that had been buried for decades. Threads pulled until the full shape of what he had built finally became visible. It was larger than anyone had wanted it to be. It implicated people the court had trusted. It required a kind of reckoning that couldn't be completed in a season or a year. But it had begun. That was something. Cade and the Alpha King spoke privately 3 days after the council chamber. No audience, no ceremony, just 2 people in a room with the full weight of 20 years between them, and no clean way through it. They didn't reach forgiveness. He was honest with himself about that. Forgiveness was not a door you walked through once. It was something longer and less defined, a direction rather than a destination. What they reached was something quieter and perhaps more honest. Understanding. The Alpha had been a man who trusted the wrong person and spent 2 decades paying for it in the only currency available to him. The boy he had failed to protect. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was real, and Cade could see it clearly now, without the rage distorting the shape of it. I don't know what we are, Cade said near the end of it. The Alpha was quiet for a moment. Nor do I, he said, but I know what I hope we become. They left it there. It was enough, for now. Sarah found him on the eastern wall 3 nights later. Of course she did. She had always known where he would go when he needed to think. The same place he had crouched in the shadows the night he returned. The tree line below, the torches burning gold against the dark. Everything that had felt like a battlefield now just looked like home. She stood beside him without speaking for a while. He had been carrying what he needed to say to her for 3 days, turning it over, trying to find a version that was adequate. There wasn't one. "I came back to kill your father," he said. "Nothing changes that. I know. You should be furious." "I was," she said. "I am. Both things are true." She looked out at the tree line. "You also came back. And when it mattered, when the truth needed someone to stand in a room and not flinch, you stood there. That's not absolution." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She turned to look at him directly. "But I'm not interested in absolution. I'm interested in what comes next." He looked at her. This woman who had investigated alone for 2 years, who had moved fast enough to fill a corridor with witnesses when it counted, who had looked at him across a dying fire and said, "I missed you," without asking for anything in return. "I don't know who I am," he said quietly, "without the mission. Without the, I spent so long being the man with a purpose, and now you find out who you actually are," she said simply. "That's not a tragedy, Cade. That's the first honest thing you've had in years." He was quiet. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, "but I won't wait forever." "I know. Don't make me wait forever." Something shifted in his chest. Not the cold clarity of purpose he had lived inside for 7 years. Something warmer and less certain and infinitely more terrifying. "I won't," he said. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she looked back at the tree line, and he looked back at the tree line, and they stood together on the eastern wall, while the torches burned below, and the kingdom slowly, imperfectly, began the long work of becoming something new. Later, alone, he finally opened the pendant. He had never opened it. 20 years, and it had never occurred to him that it opened at all. It was grief. It was a symbol. It was the only thing left. It wasn't a container. But something Sarah had said stayed with him. The first honest thing. And he looked at the cracked wolf in his palm, and thought about his mother's certainty in the fire, and wondered, really wondered, for the first time. The hinge was nearly invisible, worn smooth with age. Inside, folded impossibly small, was a piece of paper. His mother's handwriting. 3 lines. Written the way you write something you need to survive you. Your father found the truth. Varen buried it. The records are hidden in the East Archive, behind the wall where the torch bracket sits loose. She had known. Not everything, but enough. Enough to point the way forward, if he ever made it far enough to look. She hadn't given him a symbol of revenge. She had given him a map, and called it remembrance. He spent his life hunting the man he thought destroyed his family, only to discover that vengeance had been hiding the real enemy all along. The fortress below burned warm with torchlight. Somewhere inside it, a king was reckoning with 30 years of misplaced trust. A conspiracy was unraveling name by name, and a woman was probably already back at her table, working, because she didn't know how to stop, and neither did he, and maybe that was one more thing they had in common. Cade closed the pendant, held it against his chest one last time, then let it rest there, not as a wound, not as a weapon, just as what it had always been. Proof that his family had existed. Proof that his mother had loved him enough to trust him with the truth even when she couldn't stay to tell it. Proof that some things survive the fire. And if you discovered that your greatest enemy had spent years trying to protect you, would you forgive them? Drop your comment.